A federal judge has just ruled that people cannot be imprisoned when they're on probation and are unable to pay fees that are associated with their probation. This is overall a pretty good story, and it's a running theme in the U.S. that's been ignored up until now. So this could actually have a ripple effect throughout the country. It all has to do with 13 indigent inmates in Tennessee. Apparently, all of them had been locked up for misdemeanors, okay? So shoplifting, things like that. And after that, they get placed on probation, but there are fees associated with probation. And when they weren't able to pay those fees, well, then they were thrown in jail. Now, we're supposed to have laws against debtors' prisons in the U.S., and the federal judge in this case was kind of speaking about that and trying to represent the people who were thrown in jail. Now, the 13 inmates who were released Friday were held for their inability to pay fees imposed by Pathways Community Corrections, the private company contracted to run the Rutherford County misdemeanor probation system. Writing in response to a November request to bar the county, this county organization, and its private probation contractor from issuing arrest warrants with high monetary bonds for violations of probation conditions and then locking up people who can't afford to pay, U.S. District Judge Kevin Sharp came down firmly on the side of poor defendants. Sharp said the current system traps low-income probationers in a pernicious cycle for years on end. Yeah. Before probationers ever had a chance to say, I didn't do anything wrong, they were locked up in jail for weeks or months on a bond they couldn't afford. So that was a statement from an official with the Equal Justice Under Law. He's the co-founder of that organization. And look, the federal judge makes all the sense in the world. Here's the thing, you can't, look, poor people are gonna break laws, okay? Just like rich people break laws. People break laws. If they can't afford the fees associated with their probation, you have to find another way around it. You can't just say, oh, well, sorry, we're just going to throw them in jail. And oftentimes when they're thrown in jail, it's not because we're trying to be punitive. It's because these private contractors are trying to make money. That's all it's about. Private prisons, private contractors, any type of private organization associated with our justice system has very negative implications on our justice system. And this is just one example of that.
When you talked about the private contractors, that's what this is all about. This is a money's game.
Yes.
And it just hurts my soul because you have these individuals that are stuck in this cycle and they are constantly going through. If I get a misdemeanor for petty theft, that means I couldn't afford it in the first place. And now you're giving me these probation fees that most likely I can't afford. Vice just recently did a whole thing on the justice system. And it was so sad and heartbreaking to see these men who got out of prison and were like, I'm basically homeless because I can't afford to not to pay these fees and also take care of my kids and do whatever else I need to do. And at the end of the day, I have to pay this probation fee because I don't want to go back to jail. And that vicious cycle is hurtful. You're not rehabilitating anyone. You're destroying people.
So let me give you guys some examples. So let's say someone is driving under the influence, which is a crime, and I think it does deserve at least one night in jail, which in a lot of states that is a law. Now, if you are a DUI offender, it'll cost you about $132 to pay for the community service requirement, okay? So you have to do community service, and you have to pay a fee just to be able to do that community service. So that's $132 right off the bat. The drug test costs about $20. When probationers are arrested for failing to pay for or complete the programs, bonds are commonly set to no lower than $2,500. So all these fees start piling up. Poor people can't afford it, and it becomes a vicious cycle where they're constantly being thrown in jail. And what happens? Our tax money typically goes toward these private contractors, these private organizations that are part of our so-called justice system, and they get rich. They're not really private because if they were private, they wouldn't rely on government money, but they rely on our tax money. And so the only winner in all of this is the people who are continuously locking people up for ridiculous reasons so they can get rich. Everyone else, including the taxpayers, get screwed.
How would you suggest that we as a regular, everyday American citizens go about changing this? Because I think that's the thing. We all see this happening. We know what's going on, especially if you live in these communities where you see people who are involved in this vicious cycle, but no one's giving them the solutions. All we're doing is saying, well, this is happening. So what would you suggest?
I mean,
I know it's a bigger question,
no,
not
no,
that you
no.
can't answer in like a minute.
This
but
is something, look, there are two things that I'm passionate about when it comes to the topics we cover, education and our justice system.
Yeah.
Those are the two things that get me fired up. So I've put a lot of thought behind what we can do to solve this particular issue. And honestly, the best thing you can do is take the profit motive out of the justice system. There's a huge profit motive for these private companies. And so you have to do away with them. When you create a profit motive, then all of a sudden you're going to see laws getting passed that are tough on crime, when in reality it's just tough on what we do in our private lives, and the government shouldn't be involved whatsoever. Drug use is one of those things. One of the reasons why we continuously fight this war on drugs is because it's all about making sure that private contractors make money, right? There's a huge profit motive there. So overall, the big issue is money in politics.
So do we tell people at home, like, if you're upset and disgusted about this, start some type of petition for your governor? What you know, like,
I would say that you have to start with a broader, bigger issue that impacts the smaller issues like this. And again, it's money in politics. One of the reasons why these private contractors are able to do what they do is because they have undue influence on our politicians. The reason why so many of our politicians, including these so-called fiscal Republicans, sign these contracts with private contractors is because they're getting paid.
From it,
They're getting paid. We need to stop that, okay? If you're a fiscal conservative, you shouldn't be in favor of government or taxpayer money going toward these institutions that are taking advantage of and exploiting the poor.